Hello, and welcome to the Screen Composer Studio, a podcast about the musical storytellers behind some of your favorite films, shows, video games, and more. I'm your host, Adrian Ellis. Steph Copeland cut her teeth in the Windsor, Detroit underground electronic and hip-hop scene, but her scoring career quickly developed alongside her successes as a songwriter and performer. With her dark electronic sensibilities and production chops, she soon became known for her gritty work on indie genre films like Antisocial 1 and 2, Bite, I'll Take Your Dad, and more recently the 80s-inspired synth-drenched Vicious Fun. She has since had a chance to show a more light, playful side, scoring romantic comedies like Snowbound for Christmas and dramatic series like The Wedding Planners. We look at how she balances her love of scoring with writing and producing songs, the joy of genre films, how she deals with difficult situations, having a cinematographer as a partner, and her take on success and how she looks at her future. If you like what you hear, please consider giving us a rating and sharing the episodes with your friends and followers. It really helps us grow and share the stories of these amazing creators. And now, let's jump in with Steph Copeland. Steph Copeland, welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So, just to jump right into where you came from, there's a great story about, you're starting to write songs as a teen and getting into the whole singer-songwriter experience, and your dad ends up booking you time at a studio, which I think is really cool. And if I think about myself at around that age, to go into a studio to record some of my own stuff would have been like, holy crap, this is amazing. Tell me the story of how that came about and like what that, what did that look like when you walked in? Like, what kind of a studio was it? Who were you working with? What was that whole experience?
Yeah, so I'm from a small town of Wallaceburg, Ontario, Canada. It's sandwiched between Windsor and London. If you're from Ontario, you might know the 401 corridor. And population 13,000. So I think there was only one recording studio in town, and it was owned by Rick Neufeld. And it wasn't even in town. It was about 6-7 minute drive out of town. And it was in his back shed, that like not a shed, but like a garage, like a home built studio in a building outside of his house. Mm-hmm. And so I was 15 when I went in to record some originals, like four tracks of songs that I had written and on guitar and wrote lyrics to and sang. And yeah, I went in thinking we're getting full production. He thought we're going to put her in front of a mic and she's going to play the guitar and then we're going to be finished. Well, I wanted a lot more. I wanted drums. I had been listening to a lot of like Portishead, and I think I was getting into a lot of different stuff right around then, like Massive Attack and Tricky and Nine Inch Nails, like a lot of like UK and bands and definitely cinematic dark stuff. So I was thinking, this is what I want to do. And I had all these big ideas, and he was not familiar with what I wanted to do at all. So, but he was really cool, and he was so nice. And every time I had an idea of what I wanted to do, he was there to help support it and help me out. And he ended up tracking a lot more instruments than just my voice and guitar. Right. And then my dad got the bill.
Oh boy.
But it wasn't too bad, actually. He never. I have a feeling like it was supposed to be a 2 or 3 day recording, and it turned into a week because I was like, can we do this? Can we do this? And yeah, I think that's when I realized that I really wanted to start producing around the songs that I was writing.
Right. I mean, I certainly remember that feeling of going into studios and thinking that just being in the studio would give you the sound that you wanted. And then that sort of shock of realizing that there's this gulf between a demo and the final result, which is this, I mean, it could be months of all experimentations and all these different sound levels and just how you even get to like that kind of basic sound. It just sort of, it's a big wake up call. So did you, like, once you got to that point and you're sort of like, oh, okay, I realize what this is now, I see where we're at. And what the level of what I'm doing right now is. Did you have a clear picture of like from where you are now to where you wanted to go?
Definitely. I didn't know I was making a demo either. I thought I was making a record.
Right.
I was going into a recording studio and I was going to make a record. Are you ready for this record, world? That was sort of my thought process. So when it was a demo, I was like, okay, I get this. Like I am so young at this. I have no idea what I'm doing. Like I had a big learning curve. So, but I definitely knew the aesthetic of the sound I wanted.
Yeah.
That was a very clear picture in my head, for sure.
But what I'm saying is, like, did you have an idea of like what technical gaps you had, or how to get to where you, like, did you have this, okay, I need to learn this and this and this, and this is how you actually make this stuff. This is all the stuff that's missing.
Yeah, I knew I was in for a challenge to be able to do it on my own. So I remember, like, I didn't have my license, and I was asking my mom to give me a ride to Chatham, to the only music store, like music equipment store, to buy like a 4-track or 8 or something, just so that I could start to get my ideas down. And I had to start to do a lot of research online, like what is it that I need? And I ended up getting like what was it called? Like the Roland BR8 or something like that. It was like a digital 8-track.
Yeah.
And I remember having done all this research on my own of like, okay, how am I going to track at home? And computers and Pro Tools was like not yet totally 100% the industry standard at that time, or maybe it was just becoming the popular thing. So I wasn't going with a computer-based DAW or anything like that.
Yeah.
So
and then in terms of like the production stuff, were you teaching yourself, or was it something where you found things online, or did you get tutelage from somewhere?
I was definitely teaching myself, and even just reading these manuals to these digital 8-track recorders. Right. I remember my mom being so supportive too. Like she was saying, now why is this a better deal than that? And I'm like, well, this, that, and this. And she would ask all the pertinent questions to make sure that she was giving me a ride a half hour out of town for a good reason, that this wasn't just a phase. So she was really supportive about that. So yeah, but it was, as soon as I would get the thing home, it'd be like, okay, manual time. Let's start figuring out how this thing works.
Right.
And, I'd spend a lot of time doing that and just feeling around the effects and just feeling around the machine. And there wasn't a lot online at that time.
Yeah. And this whole aesthetic that you had, I mean, you sort of mentioned some of the groups and the bands that you were sort of influenced by. Were movies and television shows in the picture at that time? Were you sort of attracted to that kind of storytelling at the same time?
Always, I was, yeah, absolutely. I don't think I realized what a big impact it had on me until years later. Mm-hmm. But it definitely affected my sound when it came to songwriting and like the style of production that I wanted. But I was also really influenced by like Massive Attack and trip hop and even some like really amazing underground hip hop that was doing like pretty cerebral production styles. Yeah.
Are there some films from back then that you sort of remember being really seminal for you, that you thought, oh man, this is like right in my zone?
You know, the Crow soundtrack had a big impact on me. That was a record that got a lot of play. So
that's like late 90s, right? So then it's like, we're talking like Fight Club, Matrix.
Definitely Fight Club. Matrix, not so much, although I like and just enjoyed the movie. You know what? You know what film I really took a lot of inspiration from was Fantastic Planet. It was actually made in the 70s.
Yeah, that's a classic.
It's animated. Right? Yeah, and when I think I watched it late night, like on TFO or something like that. It was just playing, and I must have been 16, 17. And I just was absolutely fascinated that there was this really wild animated feature-length film that had this incredible score about aliens and like this higher consciousness that they go to, but they treat humans like ants or something to be squashed. And so this was, to me, this like blew my mind out of the water. I'm like, oh, the world is such a big place with so many people have so many big ideas. What else is out there? Like this was a really exciting moment for me. And I remember sampling some of the score and like throwing it in this sampler that I had in my later on, my band ended up using, we built a song around it and things like that.
I really love this idea of something that inspires you, not because it's, oh, I want to do a movie like that, or, oh, this somehow spoke to me because of the generation or whatever else. Or it's just, something like The Matrix, where it's just like, man, it just puts you in such a cool space. But to the idea that it makes you think there are so many possibilities of what could be. I mean, I feel like sometimes these days we're in such a media saturated world where everything is kind of homogenized. At least it feels like we're living in it. I mean, if you're in this sort of like mainstream-ish, and right now I feel like we're really getting hemmed in by things like Amazon and Netflix, where we're getting fed narrower and narrower circles that are more, this is what you said you liked, so we're feeding you more of that, as opposed to like, how about something that'll just blow your mind and you'd never expect, So I really like that. I like that, that outlook. That's very cool.
Yeah, and I think being from the small town of Wallaceburg and not having my license to even leave, and not having a ton of access to more culture in general, that seeing something like that and hearing this awesome music, like the aesthetic of the score it was just so interesting. It was like a band, but it had a little bit of funk in it, and it had interesting sound design with all analog pieces of the orchestra and guitars and things like that. And it was just, it really took me to another place, and it made me want to explore more in the world of sound and storytelling. That's
very cool. And for anyone that's listening, that's like me and immediately thought of Forbidden Planet, not Fantastic Planet. Steph is talking about Fantastic Planet, which is a different movie than Forbidden Planet, which also has, incidentally, really cool, I think one of the first synthesizer scores ever done, and is also pretty wild and crazy. You then made the move to Windsor and found your early musical place in the, what did you call it, the underground electronic / hip hop scene down there?
Yeah.
Which is sort of like, cross-pollinating across the border with Detroit. Tell me about that. What was going on there at the time, and what did you find?
Yeah, well, Windsor has an amazing music scene, and all of there's so many fantastic musicians and artists on the Windsor music scene, and I kind of want to blame the proximity to Detroit, and we get a lot of Detroit airwaves. They're just playing number one, all around the dial, and so that felt like the standard to live up to, in a way. There was a border bus, and again, I still didn't have my license, but so I would often take the border bus over and meet up with a producer friend of mine, and we started making beats and writing, and at that time I'm like writing in Fruity Loops and things like that. And I was also in a band in Windsor on the other side of the border, which was more of a trip hop rock band.
Yeah.
And it was myself, drummer Shane Mearsh, and Eric Arner on bass. And I was playing the guitar and a little bit of keys, and then running the sampler. And it was, we did like Bjork covers, Portishead covers, but we did a lot of mostly original music, and it was all trip hop with electronic elements. And I was very nourished musically on both sides of the border, which was pretty great. That's
really cool. What do you think it is? I guess you were saying about Windsor, that they just sort of have this scene that's sort of steeped on both sides of the border. But I mean, there's so many really interesting, talented people that I know that have come from Windsor. Do you have an insight as to why that is? Like, what's going on there? It's that
airwave.
Yeah, it's just because of the proximity. You're getting more of everything.
Well, my theory is that, Detroit is a very well-known, amazing electronic and techno scene.
Right. Yeah, it's sort of the birthplace of a lot of those. Yeah.
It's, what's funny is like, I feel like I'm now hearing the styles of Detroit that I heard 10 years ago, now being sort of adopted in mainstream music. Like I sort of want to say I think they're about 10 years ahead of the curve.
Wow.
But only in sort of like production style. I feel like Detroit has a more experimental spirit than a lot of places in the world. It almost feels like it happens in Europe, it goes to Detroit, and then the rest of North America 10 years later.
That's interesting.
Like there's some sort of like Detroit Euro link going on there in a way.
Well, that idea that it's more experimental too, I wonder if it's just like, and this is completely just a wild guess based on some stuff that I've seen. You know, there was that great movie Detropia, I think it was called, and it was all about like the waste, like, you know, you don't want to call it a wasteland, but there is these sort of like the economic situation down there obviously is pretty terrible, and it's people are sort of eking out these very interesting existences, and there's a lot of creativity and just really cool stuff going on down there. And I wonder if it's just because that kind of gritty attitude of going, well, we're not Los Angeles, we're not New York, we're not Chicago or anything even close to any of those cities. We're just going to do our own thing.
I think that is definitely the attitude. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, that's really fertile ground. That's really fertile ground for you to sort of come up in.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially with that. And it's interesting you said experimental, because I feel like, you know, that's, knowing what I know of you, that's sort of always been a hallmark of your approach to things. You know, even if the end result isn't necessarily scaring the pants off your producers, you start with that goal in mind of trying to push yourself and to go to those interesting places. So you did 6 albums, you toured a bunch, you had a bunch of different groups you were with, and then you decided to go solo. Was Public Panic the first solo outing? Is that right? That you sort of did that as the first thing?
Well, actually, no. I was always making little solo records that I was recording. Oh, I eventually got rid of the digital 8-track and went to Garageband. Right. So using Garageband, I'm making these I'm always just writing and making tracks at home. And, you know, when I had 10 together, I'd put out an album and sort of sell them side stage. I wasn't doing any kind of professional rollout of any of these albums. This was like a kid who loves making tracks and then selling them after a show. And it was one of those things too. It was like, oh, I have a new song. I wrote it like 2 days ago. I'm going to rehearse it for a couple of days. And I'm going to play it at the next show. Nice. You know, it was very just like keep writing, then play it, then write, then play, then write, then play. And so, yeah, that's not the way you go about getting a major music career, you know? But so yeah, I was always making these indie albums under the name Parallel. That was when I was in the Detroit group called Upgrade. That was my moniker there. And so that would be my name that I released these solo singles and albums out of. And
then once you decide, then you went as Steph Copeland for Public Panic, which is sort of your first major release on your own, right?
Yeah, that's right. So that was after I moved to Toronto. That was after I met my now fiance, Jeff Mahar. And I came up, you know, I had kind of said goodbye to the live show scene for a bit. Like I was sort of at a place where I wasn't really enjoying it as much, and it became sort of more of a bar scene after a while. And so I sort of put the brakes on. I was like, you know what, I'm not going to do the live thing. I cut myself into a cycle, and so I, you know, just stopped going to the bar, stopped playing the live shows, and I just started to record at home. But I was in this headspace where I was like, I'm going to go in a completely new direction. I'm going to sort of up my game and get really maybe more experimental with the vocals, or maybe like, I don't know, just whatever I feel like. I'm just going to try something else and see what grabs me. Mm-hmm. And so I was doing a lot of recording when I met Jeff, and we fell in love and moved to Toronto. And about maybe 3 years later, I hadn't really released any solo or any pop music or anything like that. So I had this huge itch to do that, and this huge desire. I had been scoring for a couple of years and learned a lot, and I was ready to kind of get back in the world of songwriting, and definitely wanted to do something. So that's where Public Panic came from.
What's the main, I mean, I get a kind of sense that it's really like a lot of the stuff that you write actually sort of seems to be talking about the media and how the media sort of affects our daily lives and what it does to us. Was that the sort of gist of Public Panic in terms of like what you were talking about?
Yeah, I have a lot to say about the media and what we consume. And I've had so many thoughts of like, are my thoughts even my own? You know, like where did all this really come from?
Right. Yeah.
And, you know, we can't unsee what we take in, so we have to be really careful about what we take in.
Right.
And it's near impossible to avoid media. Probably impossible, actually.
Yeah. No, that's all really interesting. I mean, that idea that you're immersed in it, that it's impossible to sort of really shut yourself off as a person living in the modern world. That, you know, I like that idea. Are these thoughts even my own? Because I do sometimes wonder that. Or actually what happens to me more often is I think I had an original thought, and then I go back to some podcast that I listened to 2 years ago, and I'm listening and I'm like, oh, right, that's where that thought came from. Dang. So how did you end up then moving from, you know, the world of writing songs and being a performer to getting into writing music for films?
That was probably the luckiest break of my career. I had just met Jeff, who was going to be the cinematographer for a horror movie that had next to no budget. And he got me the opportunity to show the director some of my little experiments that I had ever since leaving the bar scene, and I'm like doing some weird recording at home and just kind of like letting whatever idea fly. I had a chance to show those to the director, Cody Callahan, and he was like, yep, okay. And it was going to be for a horror movie called Antisocial, and it was like this electronic score. And I had been doing a lot of weird vocalizations mixed with like electronic elements, and then like some cinematic elements that were really dark. And it was just this, I guess, the sound that made sense for that film.
I just want to point something out because I think it's kind of interesting. And I wonder how you think about it now, and maybe how you thought about it then. One thing I didn't mention and didn't come up is that you actually ended up getting a publishing deal from Public Panic, which is pretty awesome. And now you're doing these experiments. You're sort of moving away from that stuff that you were doing before, and you managed to attract the attention of a film director because you're kind of doing your own thing. Were you really just like pushing the envelope of your own interests and sort of doing the things that really just appealed to you? Or was there a certain end goal that you had in mind? Like, to me, it feels like from the outside, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you kind of just sort of did your own thing and you got kind of rewarded for being very Steph.
I think so. I'd like to think so, because I definitely wasn't making any plans other than what attracted me to songwriting and producing or creating. I don't think I ever really, well, no, that's not true. I've set out to do something more poppy, and that would have been my dual EP and things like that. And because it was rolled into a project for another, for a production. So,
right.
But when I'm doing stuff for myself, I'm definitely just feeling around for what makes me tick, I think.
That's amazing. Was what you were doing as a songwriter and your approaches, because I mean, one thing you said to me before we were talking today is this idea that when you're writing songs, you're creating a persona. You're creating this sort of like idea of a person and their story, and then you're inhabiting that role, which is kind of like acting. And I think, you know, that must be a helpful in for you to understand other people's visions, or understand filmmakers and producers' visions of what could be on the screen and how to tell those stories. Was that a helpful thing for you?
You know, I never looked at it from afar like that, but it must be. It absolutely must be. Just being able to kind of slip into someone else's POV and go from there. So I think, yeah, in a way. I mean, you know, when I was a little kid, I was a little bit of an actor. Like I was always performing and putting on a little show, whether it's for friends or family. And like, look, I was doing a lot of look at me do this. And so, you know, and it must be that I was able to slip into a character. Yeah. And so I do think I have maybe empathy for the characters I'm scoring.
Yeah.
And if I don't have it, very naturally, if it's not blatant, I think that I can go in and dig around and find what is this person's motivation. Maybe even make up their own backstory in my own head and never tell the director what I was thinking.
That's great. I love it. You have your own, like, again, sometimes it's sort of a cliche, but they say, music is another character on screen, and you've created this entirely new character that exists inside the screen. The first film you did with Black Fawn was Antisocial, is that right? Apart from, what I imagine would have been the standard kind of things that would have screwed your head around a little bit, like trying to chase time code and how to line up picture and all the other sort of technical things, what was the biggest creative challenge on that film?
Understanding shapes of cues, I think.
Ooh, I like that. I like that. That sounds great. Yeah, the shapes of cues. Okay.
Yeah, like I think I was like halfway through the film when I started to realize where a scene had its pivotal moment or its switch or its shift, and where. Thinking in terms of dramatic swells. And I didn't have that language even in my thoughts, not even remotely close. I was really just like, okay, Steph, you know how to make music. So make music, and it has to be dramatic, and it has to relax, then it has to be like, I wasn't lining up a lot of the themes with the character's inner thoughts or things like that. I was just sort of scoring the scene like I was scoring the movie, not the characters, in a way, but it took me about halfway through that film to realize, okay, no, okay. There are motifs that you have to be repeating here. And there are, like, all of the stuff you learn in Film Scoring 101, I didn't really have any grasp on. I did understand how, when I was watching a movie, what was happening with the score when I was enjoying a film. And when I was listening to the score, I was like, yes, of course that's a cliff, and then we fall off it, or and then we're shifting, but it took me halfway through that film to realize you need to do that now, Right. And I know that sounds like a 16-year-old or 50 or younger would understand some of that, but I think I was a little overwhelmed too with the monumental task of scoring a film without having any idea, any base of any note, like anybody telling me how to do it, and just sort of feeling how to do it.
Yeah.
That then I was starting to realize, no, you're the decision maker. No one's going to tell you.
Right.
Start making those decisions.
I don't know. I think you're selling yourself a little short, because I think most people struggle with that. I think that is a real mystery to figure out. And I do think that, people that beyond mastering music, mastering the art of scoring moving pictures is about those kinds of things. And it involves a ton of different aspects, including your empathy and your ability to understand narratives and why characters make certain decisions. And then, beyond all that, the weird alchemical process of turning those ideas or those thoughts, like here's a cliff, here's a shift, here's a switch, like all these words you're using, how does that sound in music? There's like a bunch of different ways to do that. Do you think not you particularly, but do you think it is possible to codify that kind of stuff? Or do you think that this is the domain of of instinct and the domain of feeling it out?
That's a good question. I've thought, and I've been afraid that it could be codified in the past, but then I'm reminded that we need feeling. I mean, how deep can we codify feeling? I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. Like what? And who's going to tell the robots the fictitious backstory of this character to help motivate their sound? Who's like the secret I keep from the director is I had to give somebody a backstory to motivate my score. How is the robot going to do that? I don't know.
Right. Yeah.
I'm not sure.
So when you were working with Cody on that first film, was he able to guide you? I think it was his first feature too, so he was probably a little over his head at that point in terms of just being able to wrangle all of the different things you have to wrangle when you're making a feature. It's a huge undertaking.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it was massive. I know they had a crazy set where they actually shot in a house that was going to be demolished.
Oh, wow.
So, and even some of the cast and crew were sleeping in it because, yeah, it was like
real
a family
indie filmmaking.
affair. Yeah. Yeah, but Antisocial went on to do really well. Like for his first film, like there was quite a buzz about it. And it ended up leading to why Black Fun got an 8-picture deal with Breakthrough.
Right.
And I fortunately was along for the ride, not contractually, but like just like, and you'll score them stuff.
Nice.
Yeah.
Was there any point at which you kind of worried that you were going to be pigeonholed as a horror composer, or that you'd be like, you know what, one horror was fine. Can I live in this world for 8 more pictures?
I was so stoked. And I don't, like being pigeonholed as a horror composer didn't bother me at all. Because with horror, you get to have so much fun and there's so much experimentation that can happen.
Yeah.
There's so many different genres of horror and aesthetics of there's so many different brands that you kind of never know what you're going to get. You're not just doing orchestral horror stings and high string. It's not that every time, it's that would be your classic horror score, but you can do some really wild synth scores and what was possible is so exciting and still is. So anytime anybody wants a horror score, I'm like, yep. Yeah, let me at it. Like, what are we doing here?
So you talked a bit about what the idea of media and what media can do to us, or what its place in society is. Do you have a sense about horror films in terms of what they can mean culturally, like what their importance is beyond just thrills and scares?
Absolutely, and I'm not going to say that I've been 100% super proud of every single horror score that I've created because of some of the content, especially violence against women and normalization of that and normalization of rape culture and things like that. And how is this being depicted as well? How are we depicting, women being murdered? Like, what's the lens we're looking at that through? Right. And so I have to do a lot of compartmentalizing in order to make sure that I'm still able to flow creatively, freely.
Right.
And if there's something that's irking me, I have to put it in a box for sure. Right.
Do you have certain touchstones in terms of horror movies that you think are doing, or have a culture or a place in our culture that is kind of important and is saying something really interesting?
As far as horror goes, wouldn't you believe that I don't have a list of like a top 5 of favorite horrors, but I recently watched Mandy.
Oh yeah, right, Nicolas Cage.
And the score by Johan Johansson. And it was this forward motion of revenge. And it was so stylistic and absurdly acted, but wonderfully so. And the score was so, I want to say, damp. Like it was like this mist that hung in the air all around you the whole time you were watching this film. Like it was so thick. Like it was like a fog and a haze that was surrounding this this strange activity. That really is staying with me.
I had that experience recently watching the 2018 version of Suspiria, which is sort of the remake of the late 70s thriller by Dario Argento, and great score by Tom York from Radiohead. And it was one of those things I would sort of describe it very similarly, in that there was this atmosphere that just sort of hangs there like this mist. Like it's very it gets into you, right? It just sort of seeps in, and it's great. I love it. I just loved sitting in that film. It wasn't about the creepiness. It wasn't about like the ultimate, the themes or the story, the narratives, the characters, or anything like that. I mean, those were all really well done as well, but it was just that atmosphere. Also, 70s, Berlin, before the wall fell, and just they just nailed it. They that feeling there, because I grew up in the 80s, 70s and 80s in Germany, and it just that feeling was definitely there. But then this it's a natural spot to make something that just feels gray, grim, and really just kind of like off somehow. This podcast is brought to you by the Screen Composers Guild of Canada, celebrating its 40th year in 2020. The SCGC is a national association of professional music composers and producers for film, television, and media, whose mission includes promoting the music, status, and rights for film, television, and media composers in Canada. Special thanks to the SOCAN Foundation for financial support. For more information on the SCGC, please visit www.screencomposers.ca and follow us online at Screen Composers. And now, back to our show. So let's go back to Cody and the Black Fawn, because one of the more recent projects you did with them was Vicious Fun, and that looked like a blast. And again, you're talking about Mandy and that stylistic, bold filmmaking. That looked like it had that vision and that drive.
Yes, it did. Cody knew exactly what he wanted with the score. He wanted 1980s retro synth, but it had to have a little bit of a comedy aspect, like a little bit of a wink. So a little bit of that 80s cheese was going to work out really well in the right places.
Nice. With
the right sounds. It was a total blast to score because it had been a long time since I did like a wholly electronic or even pop score. There's a lot of pop elements, like 80s pop hits references in the score. So I got to really tick off a lot of boxes creatively in that I got to sort of make these song-like score pieces. So I'm like falling onto my songwriting chops. And getting to produce too. Like it was really high production in that, like, this all has to sound like pop song, or the beginning of a pop song, or it has to have a little bit of a something that reminds you of the 80s at the time, which is like whatever the hits are playing on the radio of the 80s. And so, or like Miami Vice throwback with that, like, guitar harmonies and then Phil Collins, Tom Phil's, right? So we're taking all of the hot tropes of the 80s and importing them into the score.
I've heard bits of this. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I've seen the trailer, which looks bananas fun, and the score. What I have heard of the score, it sounds like you just nailed it in terms of the production and everything. But it does sound like you also had a real challenge, making this film work. First of all, it's a pandemic project, so all of a sudden you're thrown into this, worldwide event, which has affected us all. And then, finding that balance of the horror and the comedy, like it sounds like it was a lot of trial and error to get there. What was like? How did you work through that?
So yeah, this I got Picture Lock like 3 days before lockdown on March 17th up here in Canada. And so I was told I had a month to score this, at first. Wow. And so I started burning through, because I knew there were some really big pieces that had to come out of the score. And I think I probably was panicking a little bit because, oh my God, we're in a global pandemic. Yeah. And every night, the nightly news would be this pretty scary stuff that's going on. And then so I actually scored the beginning of the film much darker than what it was. And I wonder if it's because I was like freaking scared.
So, for sure.
But thankfully, due to the lockdown, I ended up getting an extension of a month. So I was like, oh, okay. Now let's find the comedy in this sucker. So I went back and started to find the humor in this thing, and like with really fun, goofy synth tones, and so we started winking at the audience. So I tossed my dark, foreboding, scary score, my pandemic score.
Nice, yeah.
And actually scored the film.
That's
great. It worked out beautifully.
Amazing. And then another recent picture you did with the same group, the Oak Room, which you describe as a dark Gothic thriller. What I wanted to ask you about was you were working with violinist Dr. Draw, who seems to have a very interesting approach. And a lot of the players you work with, including our mutual friend and colleague Bridget O'Regan, you work with a lot of people who are primarily, I would say, improvisers and by ear kind of players, and not necessarily like, give me a chart, I'll play the notes, and what you get was what you get. And I feel like that might be something that is happening more and more, but it does it is a sort of, I don't want to say it maybe sea change, but I feel like it's sort of not the classic or the typical way that it's always been done in, film scoring and TV scoring. What's your approach with that? Because I feel like I'm sort of 50-50, and I see the benefits and the pros and cons for either side. And I have challenges working on both sides. So I'd really love to get your insight on how you work with those kinds of players and what you did with Dr. Draw on the Oak Room.
Absolutely. There's two reasons why I like working that way. Number one is, the boring reason is, there's usually not a lot of time to put pen to paper. But I can usually, when I'm in the room, communicate exactly what I want on the spot. And if we need to throw some notes down, I can do it really fast. Use a quick program, print it. That's the guide, but what I want you to do is deviate or something, right?
Yeah, okay.
So number one, it's a nice, fast way to work. But the other thing is I feel like I have a lot in common with people who improvise, and I can really appreciate that there's a lot of emotion that can happen on the spot. Sometimes when you demo a thing, or when you're doing like a first pass, sometimes it's the best. Maybe you're coming up with a vocal for something and you're like, okay, play the track back, and then you just trill into it, and then you get like this amazing juicy first impression, and that's captured in the recording. So having worked with Bridget and Eugene, like those two players in particular have that music right on the tip of their fingertips. Like it's just wanting to come out so bad. And I can really relate to that, because sometimes I just want to sing this melody so bad, and it's like right there, and it's tangible for me. And I can tell that it's tangible for them. So getting that energy captured in the recording is really important. And sometimes they invent the motif for that character, or those moments when we see that. And so I'm like, okay, those 4 notes that you just played, what we're going to do is we're going to elongate them. And so it becomes like they've helped to create the composition for this moment, or this character, these pieces. And I think it's one of the most exciting parts, is working with someone who's so excellent with their instrument and who can improvise in such a beautiful way. And they are always drawing from within their own experiences, and they have such a unique perspective on how their instrument should be played. And it's a way to capture the humanity of the performance or the piece that is in every story. Generally.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. I have so many questions. First of all, you mentioned the word demo, and I'm thinking, when you demo for the director. So have there been instances where you've gone back to them and going, okay, we've got the live players on now. It's different. So you need to like, have you had to go back and basically get reapproval for stuff like that?
No, not so far. What I've done is I'll demo to the director using the MIDI violin and say, you hear this crappy top line? That's going to be by a real person.
Yeah.
And it's going to be like 10 times better. And they're even going to do something cooler, but here's a placeholder for now. Okay. So expect better. And then when the improved, beautiful version comes in, it's a massive, holy heck yes.
I imagine that with working this way, the Quincy Jones rule applies. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, this is something that my friend Ron Korb once told me, that he heard Quincy Jones say, there's only one rule to producing: hire the right person. So you want to pick the right person to do the job, because if you pick a person that sort of has this kind of like vibe and you don't pick the right person for that thing. Has it ever happened where you like call someone in and you think they're going to be great for it, but it just doesn't work?
It's always been so enjoyable. And I think the bonus of working with improvisational players is you have a language and you create, yes, do this and do that we just rehearsed, but then at the end, go apeshit or hold back or hold that note, or you can sort of just say the direction and then say, okay, 1, 2, 3, record. And, it's just this quick communication. Or, sometimes you get to even express why they're playing in a certain way for a certain part. And when you see it click with the player is like, and then they're connecting with the character and they're now a part of that storytelling, and they can it gives you shivers. Actually, it's really amazing when you, the character, and the player all have this connection, and you're like, okay, now we're really telling that.
Yeah. That's great. As Trevor Morris really said it great in my interview with him, he said 1 + 1 = 3 in those situations. So, it sounds like one of the key elements to this working well is to either be in the room or at least on the phone or on Zoom or something with the player while the session is happening. I imagine this doesn't work so great by sending them a bunch of notes and then kind of getting stuff back and going, yeah, not this, this is better, blah, blah, blah. What is in your toolkit in terms of communication? Are there certain words that you sort of fall back on? Do you use because you're an RCM trained classical vocalist, do you find that you go to the voice to describe what you really want?
Yes, I do. Yes. I'll hum stuff sometimes, and I'll sing it the way I envision it being played using, the voice. Like the violin and the voice are very similar, really. It has been nice to be able to use the voice to say exactly what you're looking for. And then with the talented Bridget and Eugene, they're just like, oh, and 2 seconds later, they do exactly what you just did on the violin.
Yeah. It sounds like it would be a lot of fun for players too, because I imagine if you're just like always looking at, the chart and you're like told, here's how to play the notes, here's how long, here's the technique, here's the extended technique, here's, the articulation, it's all there. So you kind of just have this, like, you're very much narrowed in, you're just playing. Whereas if you say, why don't you show me something cool here? Like, what would you think would be kind of a neat effect? Or it sounds like it would be a lot of fun for them to get into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, the other tool in my toolbox is just telling them about the story. Make sure they're all on board with the story and what this character is really going through. And by giving them a cut of the film, obviously, to watch before they're coming in so that they understand sort of the temperature and any kind of temporary score that might be in there. Yeah. Just to get them in the right headspace, because that, they're essentially co-scoring that section with you. Right. They're bringing their artistic value to that score, and you need them to be super present.
Mm-hmm. Where do your ideas come from, and what do you do when you get stuck?
Oh, this happened to me the other day. You got to go to bed when you get stuck. You got to go to sleep because that's usually what has got you in the rut. You're overworked and overtired, and everything sounds the same, and your ears can't hear. So what I do usually is try to get some sleep. My ideas come from... Where do my ideas come from? I don't know. Where do your ideas come from? I guess it must be your life, the life you lived up to that moment. I don't want to get too existential there, but
I might have posed the question in a way that makes it sound more highfalutin than it was really intended. I mean more to say, how do you generate ideas? How do you capture ideas? What's your sort of process when you begin sort of like synthesizing stuff from the very beginning? What's your first? What's your go-to? What do you start with?
After watching the movie and sort of getting a feel for the thing as a whole, and you watch it a couple times, and maybe you've read the script, and maybe you've had a couple conversations with the director, I usually try to look at where everything is taking place. Like, are we in a warehouse and everything is cold, hard, and damp and brick, and what is the environment? Or is this film taking place out in the woods or in the snow? Like, what is the environment? And I usually take a lot of inspiration from what the sound design might be, and what the ambience of the film might be, and what it might sound like. Is it stark? Is it lush? Is it teeming with life? Is it the wilderness? Is it a stark wilderness? Is it woodsy and cracking leaves? So I tend to take a little bit of a sound design approach to create a little bit of a palette and an ambience, and that will usually narrate what kind of instruments I'm starting to go toward. Okay,
so now I got to scratch my own itch, because having worked with you, I feel like our approaches are a little different, and I've been really fascinated by. Or I should say, I just wonder how you start. When you say that, I just wonder what it looks like. You mentioned Hildur Gunnar Dirtner as being one of the people that sort of inspires you in her approach, being very sound driven as opposed to, starting with chords and melody or whatever else. So can you walk me through what that actually looks like? Well, what are you doing when you start, when you're creating, like, I love this idea that you're collecting all these sort of like images and words and environments and what the sound design might look like and what's going to sound like, and then sort of drawing that in. What does it actually look like in pragmatic terms?
How do I open the session and get started, sort of
Yeah,
thing?
just like what are you actually doing? Is it meant, like, for me, I would think like, okay, I'm thinking those things, I'm feeling those things, and now I'm searching for the chords that feel like that. That's how I would start. I've got a string patch. I'm like, what weird chords fit with this weird mood? I don't think that's what you're talking about.
No, well, in a way I am. It depends on sort of where I feel is the jumping off point to dive into the film. Like,
Right.
If I feel like I should create some sort of overarching theme that is saying something about the film, maybe I'll start with chords to build a theme. But what it really usually looks like is I'll find sort of one of the quieter moments and maybe start playing around with drones and ambiences and see what feels like maybe the tension / ambience, or that is one approach. That's one approach that I've done recently. Other times I'm sitting there with the whole locked picture right in front of me, and I open up some synthesizers and I'm starting to plod through some patches until something sounds the way, to me, the film looks.
So what to you, what is ambience? Like, if you're saying, you said drums and ambience, what is ambience? And then second part of the question is, when you're doing, when you're looking for those sounds, those synth patches, are you using descriptors to try and sort them, or are you just patch diving?
It depends on the plugin to get down to it. Like, sometimes I know a good library that I've got that'll have a few options. So I'll sort of dive in and I'll look for those. And when I buy a new piece of equipment, or like a new soft synth or synthesizer, I am so excited that I usually go in the first day and I spend a couple hours and I'm like, oh, I don't like that, I do like that, I don't like that, I do like that. And so I favorite them into a folder that I can easily pull. And I've organized it like the day I got it because I was so pumped.
Nice. That's smart.
So usually I can find it by going into the folder that says dark, pitchy texture.
Yeah, that's really smart. I should do that more often. I like try to. I really hate menu diving. I hate patch diving so much. Like, because most patches on most instruments are designed to be impressive sounding out of the box, and they're just kind of like there to show you what the instrument can do. Most of them, like 95% of them, are useless for scoring unless you take like 80% of what's going out. And if you don't understand how to take absinthe apart, which I don't, you're just like, I don't know what any of this stuff. I just forget it, and I go and record something outside instead. So that's a great. I love that, to sort of use that juice, to use that energy right off the bat to go in and do something that is kind of, partly creative, but also really kind of admin work. Like, you're making folders and you're organizing things into their places so that when you do have that inspiration, or you're trying to get inspired, you're not, putting yourself into this dredgy, like, horrible ditch of trying to filter through 1,000 million things.
Totally. And the other thing is too, you're like, well, what did I just pay for? What do we have here? So you're like, okay, I saw your trailer, I saw the walkthrough, the sound good, but what did I really get? And so, you just making sure that you made a solid purchase. And while you're doing that, you just make a folder.
It's so smart. The other pitfall I fall into all the time is I'll get something and I'll be like, I'll kind of do that, but I'll just get stuck on one patch and I'm just like, oh man, this sounds amazing. And then that's all I use for a really long time. And then I forgot, like, you actually have other things that could work, maybe a little bit of, I don't know why I'm doing a Marlon Brando there. You could do some other things, Yeah, so that's a great tip. I love that as a basic tip. Moving away from the creative aspect, I'd like to, because I've seen you operate in some challenging interpersonal situations where there might be some friction between you and one of the team, or there's a difference in opinion in terms of how to move forward. How do you generally approach those kinds of tough situations? How do you broach that kind of, whether it's diplomacy or, because I've heard you, like, when we've had conversations, you're like, you have a certain I'm not willing to go past this point. This is where I'm sort of able to go. And I've always been really impressed by your ability to navigate those waters. What's your sort of MO in terms of that?
Generally, my approach is, who's signing my paycheck at the end of the day? Who's the boss? You're not going to make anybody like your piece of music. And, but if you know how to fix it without throwing the baby out with the bathwater, you don't need to tell them that. Like, you know how to fix something so that it's not this monumental, horrible, train wreck where you don't want to go to work and work on the queue. But if they're saying this is not working for me, I think understanding, well, what do I have to do to make it work? And maybe I do have to rewrite the whole cue. Maybe it's really not working because it's not telling the story the way it ought to be told. But if it's just about like little things like aesthetic, or maybe there's a sound that someone doesn't like, but they think that the whole thing is not right because of one sound. I've had many situations where I've isolated the issue and I've maintained the integrity of the cue for the most part, but have taken away the thing that was buzzing them, and it's always better for it. It's always better. It's better because your client's happy, and it's better because you spent time to actually lovingly take their note and do the thing and get it right. So my whole my approach on that is, if there's a note, just take the note. Somebody's not happy, and you have to enjoy your job. You have to enjoy walking in the studio and be happy the moment you open the session, because you're like, okay, I'm gonna really rock today. I'm gonna knock this out of the park. I'm gonna blow this out of the water.
I mean, I love notes. I especially love notes from people who can clearly articulate what it is they don't like, or what they or what they do actually want. And so when they go, no, you missed the mark here. It's nice music, but it's not working for this scene because this and this and this. I'm like, great, okay, that makes sense. Let's go rework that. And of course, like when you're in those kinds of situations, that not only is it going to serve the picture better, not only are you going to write a better score, but probably the music is going to get better too, because you got another crack at it. You're going to be more intentional, more thoughtful about it. But you must have been in situations where they were not able to tell you what they wanted. You just keep going back and back to the drawing board. How do you work through that? Like, how do you manage that kind of situation where it's like, okay, I don't know what to do anymore. Like, well, you're not giving me anything.
Yeah. So in that situation, you're like, okay, I'm actually on my own. It's time to, be a big girl and make some big decisions. And so usually that means like, I need a couple days off. I need to walk out of the house. I need to walk away from the studio. I need to go shopping and have some coffee, see my sisters, do a thing, like totally shut off scoring, and then come back and kill it. And say, it's time to make the decisions that are required to make this a hit. And sometimes when the decisions aren't being made and you're just trying things, I've realized is trying things is not succeeding every time. But going for the win every time will win more.
Wow, that's badass. I'm impressed by that as a statement on its own. It almost sounds like we're talking about playing basketball or something. Now. You just go for the win, Don't let them stop you.
I gotta Jordan this shit.
You just gotta go and score. Just get out there and dunk those balls.
Yeah.
That's so. How does that actually that sounds like just an attitude change. Like you're going, okay, I'm going to stop trying, and I'm just going to take this by the scruff of the neck and go to where it needs to go. You haven't actually changed anything about the dynamic of you and the person you're working with. You've just changed your whole attitude about how you're doing it.
Yeah. And you know what? I have a whole lot of things that don't work, so I don't have to deal with that anymore. I'm not going to do that because those didn't work. So now I've actually narrowed down my, the work a little bit for myself. The future, what I'm going to do has been narrowed down by getting rid of the crap.
Yeah. Wow. That to me feels like a seeking counsel on the mountain kind of stuff where I'm like, I'm gonna have to go home and think about this Zen koan for a little while. Just stop trying and just go and do it. That's great.
It takes you gotta shake it off, because
yeah. Oh yeah. Well, because for me, when that kind of stuff, like I guess I get in my own head and I start to think maybe I suck. Maybe I actually don't know what I'm doing. Like this person is not like they've made this movie. They know what they're doing and they're not able to give me. Maybe I just don't know what the fart I'm doing over here.
But you didn't, because clearly it failed. So now you have to go and know what you're doing.
Oh boy. Yeah, I'm going to have to meditate on that for a while.
You know what's funny is the only thing in life I actually know how to make hard decisions on probably are score choices. Everything else is like, what couch do we need for the living room? What colors should we do? Like, oh my God. So the big life stuff, I'm like, I cannot make a decision. But when it's time to like, I think maybe that might be one of my strengths is like when it's time to like just cut the crap and do the thing that's going to be the thing. I think I can maybe flip a switch kind of easily.
That's interesting.
When it comes to
because for me, it feels like, I mean, music is subjective, right? Many different things can work and many things could work for somebody else. And sometimes I'm like, no, this was the thing that I thought was it. I don't know. Like I could do other things, but that was my dunk apparently, but it didn't work. So I'm going to have to think, I think that's one level deeper what you're suggesting. So I'm going to have to think about that.
Well, it's
I'm
really
not gonna
hard
figure it
though
out
when you put like a passionate step forward in what you truly believe. And that's happened a lot to me too, like where I really gave it everything that I had. I think the other little, I don't know, spin I give myself to succeed after failure is say, well, did you really give it everything you had? What didn't you do? And give myself a little like, well, did you, how hard was that for you? Maybe you should challenge yourself further. Maybe you should think outside the box or like put yourself in an uncomfortable situation. Maybe that's what they want.
Right.
And, and I gave them the best of a familiar thing for myself. And maybe the answer is actually challenging myself in totally unfamiliar territory. And I'm like, oh, okay. If the answer is unfamiliar territory, I got to like take 2 days off and then we're going to go.
Wow. I think that's fantastic advice. I really like that a lot. I'm going to try and keep that in mind, maybe because it is about changing your attitude. It's easy to get stuck in our own ruts and think, no, I did this thing. That's only one narrow path that you took. Maybe you gave it 100% on that path, but that doesn't mean that's the only path there is. Yeah, that's great. Here's an odd question. Well, it's not an odd question, but I don't know if you want to answer this question, but I think it's really interesting to me. Do you consider yourself successful, and what does success mean to you?
Yeah, I consider myself successful. I think because I didn't set out to become someone who scores to picture. I set out to be always singing and making music and writing songs and producing and whatever that looked like. Yeah, you know what? Actually, what defines my success is knowing how to put out the music that I want to, instead of feeling like I don't know what steps I need to do in order to make this sound. And I think it was maybe about 4 or 5 years ago that I felt like, I can whatever I can kind of think of, I can get pretty close to making happen. And it wasn't until then that I felt like, okay, now nothing's holding me back. Whatever I want to do, whether it's another like pop EP or a score, or an album or some experimental album, I felt like if I know exactly what I'm looking for, chances are like 9 times out of 10 I can achieve it fairly close. So I think that is my my measuring stick for success, was the ability to get out of my head and onto the computer.
Into the world, out of your head and into the world.
Sorry, I'm so like, sometimes I tell you. Yeah.
So I imagine that's kind of going to be your MO moving forward. That sounds like a really amazing sort of perspective and a way to sort of keep moving forward. Actually, those were your words, that you're just like, keep moving forward, do the thing you're doing. And it sounds just healthy from an artistic perspective too. You're taking the whole career idea out of it, and you're just making it about what you can do and what you're interested in and the sounds you want to make and what you want to hear and the things you want to participate in. That's amazing. That's really, really cool. So for you, I would imagine then, like, whatever's next is whatever's next. It's predicated on, whatever you did and whether that worked, and we'll see, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Definitely.
Yeah, very cool.
I think too, like at the end of the day, I was a pretty happy bartender. So if everything like went away and nobody's making movies, nobody needs score, it's all over, I think that I would still be able to enjoy life because I could go make money serving tables and make my records because I have, I have the ability to make recordings, or heck, even if we lost electricity, I'd still figure out a way to make sounds somehow. Wow. Oh my God, that's so nerdy. Boo.
That's really inspiring. I love that idea. That's very refreshing for me to hear you talk that way, and I think that's something I need to take on board a lot more. What's been kind of itching your brain lately? What have you found cool, inspiring, interesting? What's been tugging at you?
Lately I've been listening to scores that are really kind of off the cuff and a little wild and really bold, and thinking that I have been playing it a little safe, trying to make very cohesive movements and things that are, born out of the classical theory and proper music making.
Yeah. Doing it the right way.
Yeah. But I have a super experimental side, and I actually think maybe I sound more experimental than I do. Okay. Or at least when I set out to do things, I'm like, oh, I'm coming at this in a wacky way. Watch out, But it ends up when at the end of it, it's all like, I tend to want to fix everything. Anything that sounds like it could be a mistake, I'm like, no, I don't. I'm not putting that out there because it sounds erroneous in some way. I'm really interested in busting out of proper and anything a little wacky and experimental, and letting mistakes sit a little bit because maybe they're doing something that I'm not yet like totally fully aware. I tend to want to make mistakes, and I'm interested in like letting mistakes be the purpose in a way.
Yeah. That's really cool. Do you find yourself falling into the trap of finding something? Maybe you've like gone to this sort of well where you would go to find that kind of experimental sound and going, ooh, I really like this. And then kind of like going a little too close to that line and then going, oh, I'm just like, as opposed to finding Steph's voice doing this push, I found you're just sort of moving towards that other thing.
Moving towards the line of this sounds like a mistake, or moving towards the line of I'm correcting something that was cooler as a mistake.
No, if you're looking at new influences, right? Like you've got a Spotify playlist of like, here's the experimental stuff. Do you like get hooked on something like, ooh, I want to chase that sound? And instead of going, how do I make that my own thing? How do I make a system by which I can make cool sounds? You try to chase the actual sound itself?
Sometimes what I'll do is like play something only once and then say, you can't listen to it again. Like that was your one time that you were allowed to listen to it. Now take from that, like whatever you remember from it, and go do your thing now. And what you get at the end is totally different, but you only got to listen to it once. And that was like the ghost behind the inspiration in a way.
Yeah. Template theory. I love that. That's very cool. The joke is that when singer-songwriters cohabitate, they just end up sitting in separate rooms and writing passive-aggressive songs about each other. But you and your fiance, Jeff, are both in the film industry, but you do very different things. He's a cinematographer, and you're obviously a film composer. What does that look like? How do you guys cross-pollinate? Do you guys give each other ideas? Do you crit each other's work? What does it look like when you guys watch a movie together at night? What's the relationship like?
We'd share a lot of input and insight into each other's careers and just whatever is up. We definitely talk creatively about absolutely everything we're doing, and we discuss absolutely everything. And Jeff has amazing taste in music. like amazing taste in music, and he is the DJ in our house.
Okay.
Like for years I have not had my own playlist of music going because I mean my world is in here scoring, and so I'm like, okay, I'm musicking all the time. So he's the DJ of our life, and the soundtrack is great. And if I'm stuck on something, I'll walk out and I'll say, you know, what am I doing? And he can usually give me a couple of tips and things to jostle me out of my train of thought and give me a new idea, a new direction to go forward. And I'd like to think I offer him the same thing. Like, he's also a screenwriter and he's a cinematographer, but he's also a screenwriter.
Oh, okay.
And, you know, sometimes tossing around ideas is like, we'll sit there in the kitchen and hash out like this screenplay that he's working on and talk about the motivation of characters and things like that. So I don't know how to say other than it is the best, because I'm always thinking creatively, whether it's in music or in characters or in storytelling, even just to bounce ideas off of one another. It's a really fruitful relationship that way.
I imagine too that with you both working in the industry, the crazy hours that sometimes go along with the work must be more tolerable, or you can understand when the other person has to grind it out for a few weeks.
Absolutely. Yeah. And whoever's grinding harder, the other one has to baby them.
Right. Does it ever coincide where you both like going, I can't do this for you, got to do it for me? No, I'm also in a bad spot.
Yes. There's a lot of Uber Eats involved. Whenever we're both crunching and it's like too difficult, we all stop cooking. The groceries never get replenished and we're eating Uber Eats. But it's fantastic. He understands when it's crunch time for me, and I understand when he's on set sometimes like 12 to 16 hours a day at times.
Yeah,
it's been that wild. And you know, the other person needs a soft place to land when they've gone through the gauntlet, and we provide that for each other, definitely.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Any parting words for the audience? Anything you want to share, or a message you want to send out there?
The only way to get out of a rut is to put it in gear and step on the gas. And you can sit in the rut deciding which direction you're going to go, but you have to get out of there. And the only way to do it is to move forward. If you're stuck, you have to get unstuck, like right now. And that could look like totally changing your routine and saying, you know what, I can't stay here anymore. I'm going to like go visit friends. I'm going to go on a little vacation, or maybe I'm going to start binge watching a type of movie that I've never ever thought to watch before, or something like that, just to change your headspace. It could be I'm doing chores and I'm going to redecorate the living room. That's what we just did, by the way. Which is like, I don't know what couch to get, but you have to get out, and you have to get out now, and it just means you have to turn the page like immediately, and it can be in a mundane way. Think about other things and surround yourself with a wholly new experience in whatever that looks like. Yeah.
I like it. So if you're stuck, you just got to keep moving like that. The stuckness is almost like you think you're stuck. You just need to get motion. You need to keep moving forward. Yeah, that's brilliant. What's next for you? What are you working on at the moment? What's coming up in the future that you can talk about? Yeah,
right now I am scoring Christmas on Fifth Avenue for
Brain always in the summer. I love how we're always making these Christmas movies in the middle of the summer.
I actually don't mind a nice July Christmas movie. I really don't. Like, it's kind of fun, you know? Yeah. And so I'm co-scoring that with Sean Nimmons-Patterson, and we co-scored the City TV's The Wedding Planners last year. And so we're banging this out. And then shortly after, I'm doing a thriller called Cascade. And it's about kind of a group of teens that go on a hike and they find a downed drug plane. And some stuff happens.
Stuff happens. That sounds like a lot of stuff could happen there. That sounds great. Yeah. Where can people find more about you online? Like, are you doing the socials thing? And give us your website as well.
Yeah, my website for I'm one of those people that has two websites. My website for composing is stephcopeland.com, and my pop music is stephcopelandmusic.com. You can follow me on Insta at Steph Copeland Music.
Amazing. I highly recommend everyone go and check out Steph's work. Both her scores and especially her songwriting are just phenomenal. I'm a huge fan. Subscribe to everything that you do, and always excited when you have a new release. The latest one, of course, was with Bridget, called Gaslight, which is an awesome song with a really, really cool video as well. So you should invite everyone in the audience to definitely go check that out. Steph, this has been super fun, totally enlightening, and you've given me a lot to think about and to meditate on.
Don't think too much.
And thanks so much for taking the time, and I wish you all the best in what I'm sure is a very bright future in your scoring career.
Oh, thank you so much, Adrian. It was an absolute pleasure to be on the podcast. This is amazing.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider showing your support by giving the show a 5-star rating and sharing the episodes with your friends and followers. The Screen Composer Studio is produced by myself, Adrian Ellis. Graphics and post-production assistance by Nick Grimshaw. Special thanks to our managing director, Tanya Dedrick, as well as Charlie Finley, Elizabeth Hannon, and Guggan Singh for their support. For more information on the SCGC, please visit www.screencomposers.ca and follow us online at Screen Composers, or reach out at tscs@screencomposers.ca.